What's up and welcome to another episode of It's Tip Top Fishing. My name is Keaton and today I'm going to take you through 5 ways to improve your casting distance. Now here's a bit of a disclaimer. It is mostly based on carp fishing, this episode, but the principles are all the same for all types of fishing. So let's get to it. I'm not the furthest caster in the world. I can't cast 200 yards, but with the right setup I can cast 170 yards, and that's between, I'd say between 10 and 40 meters further than the average guy. And at certain venues like replay, that can mean a difference between catching and not catching. Number 1, line. Your line is the most important part to being able to cast far. Why? Because your line provides the most resistance when your lead comes flying off the rod. So there are 2 main things that determine whether a line is good or bad for casting. The first thing is your line diameter. Your line diameter is the thickness of your line. Pretty much this rule of thumb is the thicker the line, the worse it will cast. The second thing is your line memory. Now line memory is how much that line wants to go back to its previous shape. You want a casting line that doesn't have a good memory. Now before you go off and cast, the thinnest line you can find with a 4-ounce lead and a 12-foot rod is you put on a shock leader. A shock leader is basically a thicker material, say a 50-pound braid, 40-pound braid, and then the length of your shock leader, what I do is I do double the length of the rod, and then I do another 3 or 4 turns onto the spool. What that does is it takes up the initial push. It can absorb that push without snapping off. So you can cast as hard as you like without it snapping off. So my 2 different suggestions for a great casting line. The first one is the mono option, which is either the 10 or the 15-pound Wychwood DPF line. It is purple, it's fluorocarbon coated, which means it's very hard to see under the water, and it sinks great. That line, the diameter is not very thick, and it's also got not that much memory. So for a mono, it's a really great casting line. Like I can get 150 yards with a 10-pound without a problem. It's a really great casting mono option. Now my ultimate suggestion for the best casting line is a 15-pound braid, especially if you get a good quality braid from cmfcarp.co.za. Now what braid is the thinnest diameter for the biggest amount of strength. So your 15-pound braid will be a hell of a lot thinner than your 15-pound mono. Also, it's got no stretch and no memory. It comes off your reel so nicely. It is absolutely great. So if you want to get those 170 yard casts, braid is the way to go. Then number 2, the reel. You need a decent reel. A decent reel is very important. Now how do you tell a decent casting reel from a non-decent casting reel? Firstly, it's the size of the spool. The bigger your size of the spool, the less rotations the line is going to need to get off the spool. The next thing, and the most important thing, is the line lay. Line lay means how the reel puts the line onto that big spool. If your line lay is good, the line will come off very easily. If your line lay is bad, the line is actually going to struggle to get off of that reel. Then what you need is a really solid drag. Now what I mean solid drag, I don't mean smooth drag, I mean solid, as in you can lock that down. Why you need that is because if this drag slips when you are casting, that mono or that braid is going to cut through your finger. And there's nothing worse than that, because if you've got a cut finger and it's your index finger, it's just going to be a pain in the ass. So my suggestion for you is the Wychwood Riot Big Pit 75S. It is a great balance between, it's got a nice big spool, the line lay is really good, the drag system locks down, but when you're fighting a fish, the drag system is very smooth. It's got a matte black finish, it's got wooden handles, and it's a nicely solid made reel for a pretty decent price in my opinion. So that is a fantastic casting reel. With this reel and the rod I'm going to suggest to you later, I can cast 170 yards. Number 3, it's the rod. Now the first thing of a good rod is the length. You've got to pick the right length. Now I personally choose a 12-foot rod. Now there's going to be guys that are going, no, a 13-foot is the best, and then some other, no, 13.5 foot. I don't agree, because that doesn't work for me. If it works for you, great, perfect, then sorted, do a 13-foot. But I'd suggest a 12-foot. Why? Because I think a 12-foot is the perfect balance between getting enough reach and then getting the right tip speed. Because when I cast a 13-foot, my tip speed is a hell of a lot slower, and therefore the lead doesn't go as fast, and therefore it doesn't go as far. Now, what 12-foot? Are you going to use a 5-pound spom rod or spod rod, or are you going to use a 2-pound wet noodle? No. What I suggest is a nice 3.5-pound test curve. But I think 3.5 is the perfect balance between being able to cast the lead far and have enough give so you can fight a carp. Because remember, carp's mouths are very soft. You don't want to fight them too hard with a 5-pound rod. Then you need a decent butt grip. You need to grip that butt properly. What am I saying? I'm saying is, what you're going to do is you're going to hold this rod, you're going to use this distance, because pretty much if you got a decent distance between your right hand and your left hand, then you can actually put a bit more pressure on that cast. If this is very short, you're going to have a very long rod, and you're going to have not much, you're not going to be able to generate enough force. So a decent butt grip is very important. Then the last thing that is also extremely important are the eyes. Not these ones, the eyes on your rod, also called line guides. Your line guides are very important, because if your line guides cause a lot of resistance on your line, it's going to cause a whole lot of rubbish. So what I suggest is a 50mm butt ring. That's the one closest to your reel. That's this guy over here. Don't know if you can see it. A 50mm butt ring pretty much means it's nice and big. So the first eye that comes off of your reel, because remember, when this line comes off, it's actually doing a big loop like this. It's not doing a little loop. It's the big loop. So what you got to turn that big loop into a smaller and smaller. And what that 50mm butt ring does, it acts as a good buffer to get to the next eye and the next eye, next eye. And before I suggest the rod to you, your recovery rate on your rod, recovery meaning when you cast the rod bends like that, and then if you watch your rod, it does this for a bit and it keeps on until it goes back to straight. Your recovery rate is how fast it goes back to that. Bro, these ducks. So pretty much your recovery rate, if it's slow, you'll cast and then it'll keep wobbling and wobbling and wobbling and wobbling. If it's got a fast recovery rate, it'll go like that and it'll stay straight as quick as possible. Now, your medium fast action rods will tend to go like that. Your slow action rods will go but are better to fight fish. So what I suggest is a medium fast. Now the rod I suggest. Wychwood has recently brought in a new rod, and it's very exciting because it's this. It's the Wychwood Extremis 3.5 test curve 12-foot rod. It is amazing. It's got a lovely matte black finish, cork handles. It's got a full 50mm butt ring and goes all the way down to a 16mm tip ring, which is also still pretty big and perfect for low resistance on a far cast. Number 4,